My name is Mira, and for 28 years, I was the sister nobody noticed. Not because I wasn't there. I was always there. At every birthday, every holiday, every family dinner where my mother served the good china for my sister, Ridhima, and paper plates for me because you don't mind, do you, Beta? I never minded. Or at least, I trained myself to stop minding, because minding never changed anything. It just made me the difficult one on top of being the invisible one. Ridhima was born 18 months before me, and from the moment I have any memory at all, she was the sun our entire family orbited. She was beautiful in that effortless way that made strangers stop and stare. She was loud, funny, magnetic. She walked into rooms and rooms rearranged themselves around her. I walked into rooms and people asked Ridhima who I was. I used to think it was because she tried harder. Then I grew up and realized the truth was simpler and crueler. Some children get chosen, and some children get compared. And I was born into the second category before I ever did anything to deserve it. By the time we were teenagers, the roles were fixed in stone. Ridhima was the beautiful one, the social one, the one who's going places. I was the smart one, which in our family was not a compliment. It was a consolation prize, the thing you called the daughter who wasn't going to be anything else. My mother would say it with a little sigh, like smart was something you settled for. So I did what quiet children do. I disappeared into my studies. I disappeared into work. I built something for myself in a corner where nobody was watching, because nobody watching meant nobody could take it away from me, and nobody could compare it to Ridhima's life and find it lacking. What my family didn't know. What I never told them, because some part of me had learned that anything good I had would eventually become a weapon Ridhima's friends used against her, or worse, something Ridhima herself would casually claim credit for. Was that by 26, I had built a private equity and acquisitions firm from a single client and a laptop into a company that quietly controlled stakes in 11 mid-sized businesses across 3 states. I use the word quietly on purpose. My firm, Inara Holdings, doesn't do press releases. We don't do galas. We buy struggling companies before they know they're drowning, restructure them, and either sell them at triple the value or keep them and make them profitable. It is unglamorous, patient, invisible work. It suited me perfectly, because invisibility was the one skill my family had spent 20 years training into me for free. My family thought I worked in finance, something with spreadsheets. My mother once introduced me to a neighbor as Mira. She does numbers for a company. That was the full extent of what they knew, and I let them believe it, because the moment I said anything more, I knew exactly what would happen. Ridhima would find a way to make it about her. She always did. Then, 8 months ago, Ridhima got engaged to a man named Arjun Malhotra. The Malhotras were old money, the kind of family with a name that opened doors before you'd even said a word. Arjun's father, Shoresh Malhotra, ran Malhotra Textiles, a manufacturing empire that had been in his family for 3 generations. When Ridhima called to tell me she was engaged, her voice was so bright, it practically crackled through the phone. Mira, you have to see the ring. You have to see this family's house. Mummy already cried for an hour. Then, almost as an afterthought, you're coming to the engagement gala, right? It's going to be huge. 300 people. I need my family there. Well, I need Mummy and Papa there. But you should come too. You should come too. Like an invitation extended to the caterer. I said yes anyway. I always said yes. Some habits take longer to break than others, and hope, it turns out, is the most stubborn habit of all. The small, humiliating hope that maybe this time would be different. I had no idea, sitting in my apartment that night, that I was about to walk into the most important business decision of my career and the most important confrontation of my life, and that they would turn out to be the exact same night. Here is the part I need to explain properly, because it's the hinge the entire story turns on. 3 weeks before Ridhima's engagement gala, my firm had been quietly reviewing Malhotra Textiles for acquisition. I hadn't connected the name to Ridhima's fiancé at first. Malhotra is not an uncommon surname, and my analysts don't hand me names attached to faces, only numbers attached to risk. What I saw in that file was a 100-year-old manufacturing company bleeding money for 6 straight quarters, sitting on debt they'd hidden from investors through creative accounting that was one audit away from becoming a criminal matter. Shursh Malhotra had spent the family's actual fortune years ago and had been running the appearance of wealth on loans, on favors, on a reputation that hadn't caught up to reality yet. The Malhotras were not old money anymore. They were a beautiful, expensive corpse that hadn't stopped smiling for photographs. My head of acquisitions, a sharp, relentless man named Devraj Shah, had been the one running point on the deal. 3 days before the gala, Devraj called me with unusual excitement in his voice. "Mira, I got us in. Shursh Malhotra is going to be at a private function this weekend, some engagement party for his son. I've arranged to attend as a guest of a mutual contact. I want eyes on him before we make the offer. He's about to lose control of his own company, and he doesn't even know it yet." I remember going very still on the phone. "What's the son's name?" I asked. "Arjun. Why?" I looked down at the invitation sitting on my kitchen counter, embossed gold script on cream cardstock. The engagement of Arjun Malhotra and Riddhima Kapoor. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I said, "Devraj, I'll be at that party too." He laughed, thinking I was joking, until I explained that the bride was my sister, and that the man he was about to financially dismantle was about to become my brother-in-law. There was a silence on the line, and then Devraj, who had worked for me for 4 years and understood exactly what kind of company I ran, asked the only question that mattered. "Do you want to walk away from the deal?" I thought about it. I thought about it seriously, sitting alone in my kitchen with the gold invitation in my hand. Because whatever else I am not a person who lets emotion override strategy without at least examining the emotion first. But here is what I kept coming back to. The Malhotra family's debt wasn't a secret I was creating. It was a truth I had simply found first. Riddhima was about to marry into a family whose entire fortune was a performance, and no one had told her. If I walked away, someone else would eventually buy that debt, and the collapse would happen anyway, just without me having any say in how gently or violently it landed on my sister. "No," I told Devraj. "We proceed. But I run Point personally now. I didn't tell my family any of this. I bought a dress. I RSVP'd. And I walked into that gala 3 days later carrying a piece of information that would determine the fate of everyone in that room, while my own sister had spent 30 years making sure I understood I was the least important person in it. The gala was held at a converted heritage Havli on the outskirts of the city, the kind of venue with marble courtyards and fairy lights strung between 200-year-old trees, 300 guests in silk and sequins, a live band, ice sculptures shaped like swans, because of course there were ice sculptures shaped like swans. I arrived in a simple navy dress, no jewelry beyond a pair of small gold studs, hair pulled back. I have never dressed for attention. That night, less than ever. I needed to move through that room unseen, gathering information, not becoming the story myself. I found my parents near the entrance. My mother resplendent in a red and gold saree, already glowing with the specific pride she reserved exclusively for occasions involving Riddhima. She looked at my navy dress and said, "You couldn't find something with a little more color?" Before air-kissing my cheek and turning back to the friend she'd been talking to. I found a quiet corner near the bar and began doing what I actually came to do. Watching. I spotted Shursh Malhotra within minutes, holding court near the center of the courtyard, laughing loudly at his own jokes, a man performing wealth with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it his entire life. I spotted his wife, drenched in real diamonds that I happened to know, from Devraj's research, had been quietly pawned and repurchased twice in the last 2 years to cover cash flow gaps. I spotted Arjun, Riddhima's fiancé, handsome and easy smiling, clearly adoring my sister in a way that, I'll admit, softened something in me. Whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be his fault. And then I saw Devraj arrive, dressed impeccably, moving through the crowd with the fluid confidence of someone born into exactly this kind of event. Though I knew for a fact he'd grown up in a 2-room flat in Lucknow, he caught my eye across the courtyard for exactly 1 second. A professional acknowledgement, nothing more, and then dissolved back into the crowd of guests, doing his job. I thought I had at least an hour before anything happened. I was wrong by about 50 minutes. Radhima found the microphone. I should have known she would. It was her night, and Radhima had never once in her life let a room stay quiet when she could be the one filling it. She climbed onto the small stage where the band had been playing, tapped the mic, and the crowd's chatter dropped into an obedient hush. "I just want to say a few words," she said, radiant, glowing, holding Arjun's hand as he stood beside her, looking faintly embarrassed in the way genuinely nice people look when they're the center of a spectacle they didn't ask for. "Thank you all so much for being here. This means the world to me and Arjun." She thanked his parents. She thanked her friends. She thanked our parents, and my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue like she'd rehearsed it. And then Ratima's gaze swept the crowd and landed, for one unmistakable moment, on me. "And of course," she said, laughing lightly, that easy performative laugh she used when she was about to say something at someone else's expense and dress it up as affection. "My sister Mira is here too. Everyone, this is Mira. She's the quiet one. The one nobody really brags about. But hey, she does her numbers thing, and we love her anyway." Laughter. Genuine laughter, warm and easy, from 300 people who had no context, who didn't know they were laughing at a woman standing 8 feet away from a man who was, at that exact moment, holding a folder that would end their host family's fortune within the month. I felt the heat rise in my face, not embarrassment. I had long since become fluent in swallowing embarrassment, but something colder, sharper, the specific fury of being reduced, publicly, casually, to a punchline in your own sister's love story, one more time, in front of the largest audience she'd ever had. I smiled. I lifted my glass slightly, as if toasting her, because that is what 28 years of training does to a person. It makes humiliation look, from the outside, exactly like grace. But something in me had shifted. Quietly. Permanently. Shirsh Malhotra, standing near the stage, laughed the loudest of anyone. I want to be honest about something. In that moment, I could have done nothing. I could have finished my drink, congratulated my sister, gone home, and let Devraj close the deal in the ordinary way, over the following weeks, through lawyers and term sheets, far from any ballroom. That would have been the professional choice. It is not the choice I made. I set my glass down, walked across the courtyard, and found Devraj near the dessert table, pretending to admire the swan ice sculpture. "Change of plan," I said quietly. "We're not doing this through lawyers next week. We're doing it tonight." Devraj looked at me carefully. He'd worked with me long enough to know I didn't make impulsive decisions, and long enough to recognize when something wasn't actually impulsive at all. When it had, in fact, been building for 28 years and simply needed a trigger. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Tonight, in front of everyone, it's going to be." "I'm sure," I said. "Get Shirsh Malhotra alone. Tell him I need 5 minutes. Tell him it's about his company's Q3 credit line with Ashoka Finance." Devraj's eyebrows lifted a fraction. That credit line was the single most sensitive piece of information we had, the one Shirsh had personally falsified to keep his board from discovering the extent of the company's debt. If I invoked it by name, Shirsh would understand immediately that I wasn't bluffing about anything. 15 minutes later, Devraj found me by the garden wall with Shirsh Malhotra in tow, and I watched the older man's easy, expansive party smile falter slightly as he registered who I was. Not just some quiet wallflower relative, but a name Devraj had apparently already mentioned to him with considerable weight. "Mr. Malhotra," I said, extending my hand. "Mira Kapoor, I believe you're about to become my brother-in-law's father." Yes, of course, Ratima's sister," he said, recovering his charm quickly, the practiced warmth of a man who'd spent decades smiling through discomfort. "Lovely to finally meet you." "I run Anara Holdings," I said, watching his face carefully. Nothing. The name meant nothing to him yet, which told me everything about how insulated he'd kept himself from the reality closing in around his company. "We've been reviewing Malhotra Textiles for the past 3 weeks. I believe you're familiar with your Q3 credit facility restructuring at Ashoka Finance. The one that wasn't disclosed to your board." I watched color drain from his face in real time. "I don't know what you." You have 6 weeks of operating capital left, I said, quietly, evenly, not performing anger, simply stating fact, because facts are so much more devastating than fury. Your creditors are going to call the loans within the quarter once the audit lands, which it will, because I've already spoken to the auditor. Your company, Mr. Malhotra, is worth considerably less than the dowry my family is expected to contribute to this wedding. I know this because I've read the numbers, and I've read them more carefully than anyone in your own company has, including you. Is this? Are you threatening me at my son's engagement party? His voice had dropped, urgent, glancing around to make sure no one was near enough to hear. No, I said. I'm doing you a courtesy. I could have let this happen through a hostile process. Lawyers, public filings, your creditors seizing assets in front of cameras. Instead, I'm telling you, tonight, quietly, that Anara Holdings is prepared to acquire Malhotra Textiles' debt and restructure the company before it collapses publicly and takes your son's marriage down with it. You have a choice about how this looks. You don't have a choice about whether it happens. Shirsh Malhotra stared at me. This quiet woman in a navy dress his own future daughter-in-law had introduced to a laughing crowd 40 minutes earlier as the one nobody brags about. And I watched him understand, in real time, exactly how badly his family had misjudged the room. Why, he said finally, quietly, would you do this for us? Tonight, of all nights? I'm not doing it for you, I said. I'm doing it because my sister is about to marry into your family, and I would rather she marry into a company I control than one that collapses under her feet in a year. Whatever else is true about me, Mr. Malhotra, I don't let people I love walk into disasters I could have prevented. Even people who've spent their whole lives making sure I understood I didn't matter enough to warn. I want to tell you the confrontation ended there, quiet and controlled, exactly as I'd planned it. It didn't. Ridhima found us at the garden wall 4 minutes later, drawn by some instinct that her fiancé's father had disappeared from his own son's party looking pale, and found him standing with me. The quiet sister, the punchline. In what was clearly not a casual conversation. What's going on? She asked, glancing between us, her bright party smile faltering for the first time all evening. Papa Shirsh, are you all right? Shorsh Malhotra looked at me. I said nothing, giving him the choice of how much to reveal, because that was the courtesy I'd offered and I intended to keep it. But Devraj, standing a few feet away, apparently decided the moment called for something more direct. Ridhima, right? He said pleasantly. You should be very proud of your sister. Anara Holdings just agreed, tonight, to restructure your future father-in-law's company before it went under. Mira basically just saved your wedding. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I heard all night. Ridhima looked at me like she was seeing me. Actually seeing me, for the first time in her adult life. Anara Holdings, she repeated slowly. That's Mira, that's a real company. I've heard of that. That's a huge firm. It's my firm, I said simply. I've run it for 4 years. You never. She stopped, started again. You told us you did numbers for a company. I told you what you asked for, I said, and I kept my voice gentle, because there was no version of this moment where cruelty would have made it better. Only a version where the truth, finally, plainly spoken, could. You never asked more than that, Ridhima. Nobody in this family ever did. You decided a long time ago what kind of sister I was going to be, and I stopped correcting you because it never seemed to matter to anyone whether I did. Her eyes filled, fast, the way they always had since we were children, tears that arrived at convenient moments. But I watched something else move underneath them this time. Not performance, but something closer to genuine shame. Maybe the first honest thing I'd seen on my sister's face in years. Tonight, she said quietly, I stood on a stage and called you the quiet one nobody brags about. In front of everyone. You did, I said. And you saved my engagement anyway. I didn't do it for you, I said again, because it was true, and because I was done softening truths for the comfort of people who'd never once softened theirs for me. I did it because it was the right business decision, and because some part of me still cares what happens to you, even after tonight. Those are two separate things, Ridhima. You should sit with that. I left the gala 20 minutes later, before the band started again, before the dancing resumed, before 300 guests who had laughed at me an hour earlier could rearrange their opinions in real time in a way that would have felt, honestly, almost worse than the laughter itself. I didn't want their revised admiration. I wanted, finally, only my own. The deal closed 6 weeks later. Anara Holdings restructured Malhotra Textiles, cleared the hidden debt, brought in new management, and the company survived. Quietly, unglamorously, exactly the way I do everything. Arjun never fully understood how close his father's company came to collapsing the same month as his wedding. And I let it stay that way, because he was a decent man who deserved a version of this story that didn't involve watching his father's shame play out at a party. Ridhima called me 3 days after the gala. She didn't apologize. Not exactly. That wasn't in her. Not yet. Maybe not ever entirely. But she asked, for the first time in years, an actual question about my life. "What's it like," she said, "running a company like that?" And she listened to the answer, all the way through, without once turning the conversation back to herself. It wasn't everything. It wasn't the childhood I should have had, or the years of paper plates and gold china silence I couldn't get back. But it was something. A door that had been shut my entire life, cracked open by a single sentence spoken into a microphone that was supposed to diminish me, and instead, finally, forced my family to see the whole of who I actually was. At Ridhima's wedding 4 months later, she stood up to give her toast, looked directly at me across the room, and said, "I want to thank my sister, Mira. She built something extraordinary while none of us were paying attention. And when it mattered most, she used it to save this family instead of walking away from it. I used to call her the quiet one. I was wrong. She was just the one none of us bothered to listen to. I didn't need the apology by then. But I let myself have it anyway. Some revenge is loud. It's designed to be witnessed, to humiliate, to burn the house down in front of an audience. Mine was quiet, the way I'd always been quiet. Except this time, quiet wasn't a weakness anyone could laugh at. It was the exact thing that saved them, and the exact thing that finally made them see me. I've learned, since that night, that the people who call you invisible are usually the ones who never bothered to look.